Hi, I'm Patrick Hughes, a senior at the Jepson School of Leadership Studies here at the University of Richmond, and today I will be joined by Julia Galef, a writer and public speaker on all things rationality. Julia, thanks for being with me.
My pleasure, good to be here.
So I have an interest in history, and I wanted to ask you from a historical perspective, how do you view the position that our society is in right now? One side being sort of the Steven Pinker, we're continually evolving, and the flip side being perhaps we've devolved in some ways.
I mostly agree with the Steven Pinker-esque view that by many important metrics, things are getting better in the world. Extreme poverty has gone way down even in the last few decades. Diseases have been cured, and even diseases that had been technically cured generations before are now like mostly eradicated in a lot of places where they had been lingering for generations. That's all great. I disagree with Pinker a little bit about the downside risk. Like I think that it is simultaneously true that things are gradually getting better over time on all these important metrics of human welfare. But also simultaneously that as the world becomes more interconnected and technology becomes more powerful, it becomes easier for things to happen either intentionally or unintentionally that cause huge downside risk around the world. With a focus on rationality in particular, it's funny, I often see this kind of paradise lost intuition that people have about reasoning, where they'll say, people are so they're so irrational. They like won't listen to reason. They're so entrenched in their view nowadays. Like, I pine for the good old days when people were thoughtful and not so irrational. And I don't see any evidence that those good old days existed. We have the brains we have. They haven't changed that much in the last few hundred years. We didn't evolve to be thoughtful reasoners about abstract, complicated topics. That's kind of a new thing that we have to deal with. So I think it's, the human brain is powerful and impressive in a lot of ways. It's also, imperfect and wasn't intended to tackle the kind of questions that we have to tackle today. So if there's one way in which things have, quote, gotten worse, I think it's just that the problems that we have to think about have gotten harder.
This is a leadership forum, and I study leadership here at the University of Richmond, and so I'm really interested in your perspective on the relative importance or the role of rationality in leadership, and that's opposed to characteristics, or not opposed, but in unison with characteristics like charisma or emotional intelligence.
That's a great question. I think there's a common perception that you have to make a trade-off. You have to choose between being charismatic and confident and compelling, being a good leader on the one hand, and being sort of thoughtful and critical and self-skeptical and like having well-calibrated views where you're not 100% confident in everything. And that those are your two choices. And if you want to be a leader, you kind of have to, avoid the self-skepticism and everything. And I understand why it seems that way, that I don't think the trade-off has to be there. Like, I think you actually can, to a large extent, kind of have your cake and eat it too. I have a lot to say about this, but just to give one example, we use the word confidence for multiple things, and it's actually kind of unfortunately confusing. So you can be confident in a social sense. You can stand tall. You can express your views in a decisive sounding way. You can react with aplomb when you're criticized or when things fail or don't go according to plan. Those are all important aspects of confidence, especially in the role of being a leader. But there's this other sense of confidence that's about how much certainty do you have in a particular claim or a particular prediction. And you can be much less than 100% confident in an idea or a prediction while still being very socially confident. So you can say, and I know plenty of people who do this, you can sort of confidently say, I think there's a 45% chance this will work. It's totally worth trying anyway.
Last question. If there was one quote or idea that you could put on a billboard, what would it be?
There's so many good options. Well, one of my favorite quotes is from Richard Feynman, the late great physicist. He said, the first rule is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool.
I'm a big fan of Richard Feynman, so that's a great quote.
Not
Julia,
shocked.
thanks very much for being here.
My pleasure. This is fun.